affirmation. It is, I am open and receptive as I receive this message today. Something I am about to hear applies to my life. I am here by divine appointment to receive spiritual tools for personal transformation and to help make the world a better place. My life's purpose is already within me, and I am committed to its unfoldment. As I hear its truth today, I am set free, and so are you. Let's grow together.
Thank you, Edgar. I have an extensive library, and one of my favorite books of all time was actually written in 1841 by a gentleman named Charles Mackay, and it has the rather curious title of Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And what it is a history book of strange behaviors, wacko beliefs, and strange irrationalities that caught on somehow with the general public and became widespread. And just to give you a few examples of some of the curious cases covered in the book, in France, in the Middle Ages, a nun at a rather large convent began to meow like a cat. And other nuns started joining her, and pretty soon the entire convent would meow together at a certain time every single day. And this continued until the locals called in soldiers to invade the convent and force the nuns to knock it off. There was also something in 1518 called the Dancing Plague. And this was in Strasbourg, and a number of people started dancing without any rest breaks or without any dinner breaks, without any kind of sleep. And more people started joining, and they kept dancing, leading to several of them dying from heart attacks, strokes, and exhaustion. In this region of the world, North America, in 1692 and 1693, people began having fits that were described by a local minister as being beyond the power of epileptic fits or natural disease. And the hysteria that this created led to the Salem witch trials, which led to the deaths of 25 citizens of Salem and its environs. Well, we consider ourselves to be modern and rational, and many might think that the kinds of episodes described in Mackay's book are so ridiculous as to be irrelevant in our day and age. But human nature has not changed. And here are just a few much more recent cases from our supposedly enlightened era. In Bellevue, Louisiana, in 1939, a girl developed a leg twitch at the annual homecoming high school dance. And the attacks worsened, and they seemed to be contagious because pretty soon her friends started developing this mysterious leg twitch as well. And finally, after a few weeks of this, for no apparent reason, the twitches mysteriously stopped. Interestingly enough, just about 12 years later, a young man from Tupelo, Mississippi, developed a leg twitch, and he became a star. Elvis twitched all over. In the mid-1940s in New York City, some teenagers that they called Bobby Soxers became famous for swooning over Frank Sinatra. And this involved girls groaning and flailing their arms before placing their hand on their forehead and fainting. And one former Bobby Soxer recalled how she and her friends used to play Sinatra records and practice swooning. Well, it was later learned that a press agent had hired girls to scream and swoon, but hundreds that he hadn't hired swooned right along with them. So why did the women who weren't paid swoon or faint for Sinatra? Well, as we'll see in a little bit, people have a tendency to look to others when it's time to make their own decisions. In 1976, in Mount Pleasant, Mississippi, school officials suspected drug use after 15 students abruptly fell to the ground and started writhing. But no drugs were found, and no organic cause could be found, so hysteria was assumed to be the culprit. And at one point, about 1/3 of the school's 900 students stayed home out of fear of being hexed. In San Diego in 1988, the Navy evacuated 600 men from barracks, and 119 of them were sent to local hospitals, complaining of breathing difficulties. No evidence of toxins, contagions, food poisoning, or any other cause was ever found. Well, mass psychogenic disorder is a phenomenon that results from the nocebo effect. Now, this is the opposite of the placebo effect, in which people's ailments are improved somehow by ineffective treatments or medications. In other words, people get better simply because they've been given something that they think will make them better. Well, in a nocebo effect, instead of good thoughts or good associations producing positive outcomes, bad thoughts and bad associations produce bad results. For example, in the 1990s, a study showed that people who believed they were prone to heart disease were 4 times more likely to die than people who didn't believe they were susceptible, even though both groups had similar risk factors. And the study showed that when people think that they've been exposed to a disease, or when they think they're predisposed to becoming sick, they're much more likely to develop symptoms. Well, if you think about it, this doesn't really seem that unusual. We feel physical effects based on the power of the mind frequently, whether it's the soothing placebo effect or feeling sick after eating something that you think is bad for you. I have a singer friend who was experiencing allergy symptoms, so he went to a doctor to have some testing done. And the test showed that he was allergic to several foods, including potatoes, green beans, and eggs. Now, occasionally, he'd get a craving for one of these, and he'd eat some of it anyway, and he would suffer the consequences. Well, after a few years, he moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and he had to get a new doctor who did all new testing. And now, lo and behold, potatoes, green beans, and eggs were perfectly all right, but he was told he was allergic to a totally different list of foods. In a famous experiment, a woman who claimed to be allergic to roses was shown an artificial rose, and she developed congestion, shortness of breath, and other symptoms of an allergic reaction. And when the woman was told that the rose was fake, the symptoms went away. And days later, she no longer experienced an allergic reaction to real roses. Even the color of pills has been shown to influence how people react to medications. Red and orange pills are generally considered stimulating, while blue and green pills are seen as calming. Not coincidentally, daytime cold and flu medications like Gocsl are usually red or orange, and nighttime cold and flu medications are usually green or blue. Now, all of these phenomena, the placebo effect and the nocebo effect, are the results of psychosomatic, I'll say it right in a moment, psychosomatic reactions where the mind influences how we feel. And about now you may be thinking, well, thank goodness I'm not susceptible to that kind of nonsense. But to one degree or another, we all are. In all kinds of ways, we are more or less subject or affected by the madness of crowds. As a simple example, very much like the emperor's new clothes, we can find ourselves at the mercy of those puppet masters called fashion designers. When you look at old family photos, do you laugh at the ridiculous hairstyles and clothing? Someday, People will be looking at our photos taken right now, and they'll laugh just as hard. In 30 years, what will young people think about their elders' multiple facial piercings and tattoos? Several years ago, there was an uproar about silicone breast implants. And it was claimed that they were causing all kinds of diseases and disorders. And an actress friend of mine had the implants, and she subsequently developed severe autoimmune disorders, along with several others who had had the implants. Well, lawyers got involved, and pretty soon it was a hysteria that spread right along with the lawsuits. And the leading manufacturer of those implants, Dow Corning, was forced by litigation to file for bankruptcy. Time marched on, and after it was all over and the damage had been done, it was learned that silicone is one of the safest substances on earth and has been used for years in all kinds of medical devices, including catheters, stents, and so on. It took my actress friend a couple of years to realize that she wasn't really suffering from implants after all. Now, all of these strange but true stories have one thing in common. They were all made by our human tendency to let others do the thinking, to let others lead the way, to avoid the hard work of thinking for oneself. But thinking for oneself is the only kind of thinking that works in the long run. As the Buddha said, if another drinks, does it quench your thirst? If another eats, does it appease your hunger? If another sleeps, does it rest you? Who then shall develop your understanding? One of the primary philosophical underpinnings of life in this country was the concept of rugged individualism. Now, this attitude flourished because more people than ever before were free to do what they wanted with minimal interference from government and without the heavy hand of an official state-sponsored religion. The American philosophy was designed and developed by many different people, but perhaps none were as influential as Ralph Waldo Emerson. And his basic philosophical faith, one shared by many, was that the ultimate source of truth is within us. And he outlined his ideas about his philosophy in his great essay, Self-Reliance. And this was the gist of it. He said that we may recognize truth outside of ourselves. We might find truth in nature. We might find truth in others. And the key word is that we recognize it. But he said, often we recognize it very dimly. But he said, we're often not in touch with ourselves, nor do we trust ourselves enough to find these truths. And so we depend on others, we look to books, and so on to express it for us. But Emerson insists that the truth is within us, whether we recognize it or not. Now, there's no objective proof for this. You can only prove it to yourself through a lifetime of experience. Emerson is making a great intuitive leap of faith, and you either believe because you've experienced it, or you don't. Now, to a lot of people, our New Thought philosophy seems rather self-centered. Self-centered in a negative or selfish sense. But that's not what the great minds of the ages are referring to. When I think self-centered, I think centered in the self, self with a capital S. Centered in the self, or God, or spirit, or oversoul, or whatever you wish to call it. All we can ever really know is that which is within us. As Ernest Holmes wrote in the Science of Mind textbook, we can only know as much as we can prove by actual demonstration. That which we cannot prove may or may not be true. but that which we can prove certainly must be and is the truth. Of course, many of the great religious leaders of history felt that they had accessed the truth and that they alone had access to that truth. But if we're learning to rely on ourselves, we must also assume that other people have the same potential to know their truth just as we do. And if that differs from what we think, that's fine. Trusting oneself means believing that somehow or other we have an innate wisdom, which is a projection of the God within, and that every person has that wisdom, although very few may attempt to access it. Those few we often call prophets or poets, and we cherish their insights into our own truths, those insights that we glimpse dimly through them. But to believe in ourselves and our deep capacity to understand and recognize the truth is to believe in every self, even though we have no access to any self but our own. Now, one problem that people seem to have with Emerson's self-reliance essay is that he seems to keep beating you over the head with the same idea over and over and over. Believe in yourself. And I think this repetition may indicate that Emerson was trying to convince himself as well as his reader. After all, in his day, what he was trying to do, establish himself as an independent writer and thinker, that was very difficult to do if you weren't linked to an organization like the church or a university. And it would take all the nerve that Emerson could summon to work toward his goal of being his own independent authority. And really, it all sounds so simple. Just make up your mind to trust your instincts and go for it. And the idea is simple, although putting it into practice is seldom easy. But the message is one that we all need, especially today when the ever-present media assaults us with ideas and images of how we should live and what we should believe. Now, Emerson's essay on self-reliance was written 183 years ago. And what may have seemed like a startling idea in his day has almost become a cliche in ours because it's embedded in just about every self-help psychology book in print. Trust yourself. It's hard for us to see the original force of this idea in the 1800s when people felt far less secure about themselves as individuals. And in many ways, this is as much a cultural and intellectual declaration of independence as it is an urging, a prompting to be yourself. And its major power today is perhaps needed most by our younger people who are struggling with the very powerful forces of conformity that run rampant in schools, colleges, and throughout social media. However, for those of us who are attempting to live the New Thought philosophy, it is crucial that we form our own ideas and not just accept what is said in a book or in a Sunday morning talk. The nonconformist in Emerson rejects many of today's moral sentiments. For example, he claims that we should worry more about our own family and community at home than folks 1,000 miles off. That may sound like a no-brainer to you, but how often do we get preoccupied about a disaster hundreds or thousands of miles away, and yet we ignore the disaster that just took place in our own area? What's the difference? The distant calamity was a huge news story supported by a multi-billion-dollar media industry, and the local story got a tiny fraction of that coverage. Likewise, Emerson did not believe in giving money to organizations that helped the poor. He preferred giving money directly to poor individuals in his neighborhood. Now that, of course, requires a level of civic involvement that most of us can't be bothered with. It requires us to come face to face with those in need, to become directly involved with their situation. Emerson states that it's better to live truly and obscurely than to have one's goodness extolled in public. It makes no difference to him whether his actions are praised or ignored. The important thing is to act independently. He wrote, "What I must do is all that concerns me, not what people think. The great one is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude." Now, Emerson's not urging us to withdraw from society. He was advocating direct contact with people, balanced with times of quiet introspection. There's a difference between enjoying solitude and being a social hermit. Emerson asserts that bowing to public opinion wastes a person's life. By drifting along with the crowd, those around you never get to know the real you. And even worse, the time and energy spent living in conformity to the opinions of the crowd saps the energy that you need for the vital act of creation, the most important activity in our lives. And it distracts us from making any unique contribution to society. And as individualized expressions of the one, anything less than originality on our part is a waste of our birthright. Now, to a certain extent, it's unavoidable that we're influenced by the thinking and behaviors of others. After all, from infancy, we learn to do things by imitation. But as we mature, imitation becomes slow suicide because it denies that which we are. Ernest Holmes wrote, "If we allow the world's opinion to control our thinking, then that will be our demonstration." Holmes used to talk about the race mind, which has nothing to do with racism. It's rather the tendency for the human race to believe certain things and to act in certain approved ways. Psychologists have a similar idea with their concept of the collective unconscious. And in folklore, it's sometimes referred to as old wives' tales. What it amounts to is conventional wisdom, with the word wisdom in quotation marks. Throughout the ages, race mind, conventional wisdom, has tended to keep humankind in bondage. Beliefs in lack, evil, and the like have become self-fulfilling prophecies. Beliefs in such ideas as the sun orbiting around the earth stifled scientific progress for centuries. Beliefs in the right of kings and potentates to control the destinies of their populace held people in bondage. But when we distance ourselves from the crowd, when we get quiet enough to hear the still small voice within, when we begin to think for ourselves, we're not only fulfilling our own individual destinies, but we're contributing to the evolution of the human race. Ernest Holmes again in the textbook. The sum total of all erroneous human belief binds us until the individual mentality lifts itself above the law of averages into the higher law of spiritual individualism. In our movement, we frequently quote the Apostle Paul. "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." And we tend to put most of our emphasis on the second part of that sentence, be transformed by the renewing of the mind. But equally important is that first part, be not conformed to this world. In other words, be yourself and keep your distance from the madness of crowds. Of course, being yourself and thinking for yourself puts the responsibility for your life on yourself. If things go wrong, you can't blame it on others. But if things go right, and Emerson would say that the odds of them going right improve as you learn to rely on yourself. If things go right, then you have the satisfaction of knowing that it was all your idea. Elbert Hubbard said, "Be yourself and think for yourself. And while your conclusions may not be infallible, they will be nearer right than the conclusions forced upon you." As many of you know, I was raised in a family and an environment which was about 180 degrees opposed to who and what I am today. And for whatever reason, from about the age of 10, I was determined to be somebody different and to do something different than what was expected of me. And I'm sure this caused my family a great deal of grief over the years. But, as the song says, I've got to be me. And for better or worse, I had to blaze my own trail in life without being overly concerned with what other people thought. And along the way, I discovered something quite interesting. When you are yourself, even if other people don't quite approve, as long as you stay true to who and what you are, they will have respect for you, perhaps in spite of yourself or of themselves. Lao Tzu said, "When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you." And this all came home to me a few years ago when my mother sent me a birthday card. Now, over the years, Mom had seen my ups and downs, and devout Baptist that she was, she very likely spent a lot of time worrying that I'd end up in hell for eternity. But in her own way, she was proud of what I'd accomplished and what I'd become. And here is what the birthday card said. "From the day he is born, a son finds his own unique place in the world. You've always had an original point of view. You're willing to take on challenges and aren't one to settle for something just because it's easy or popular. You're a good man, and with all you have to offer, you'll find what you're looking for. Just stay true to who you are and keep your eye on what really matters. And the good things in life that you deserve so much are bound to happen for you. Stay true to who you are. Don't follow the path. Create your own path." Walt Whitman wrote in Leaves of Grass, "Not I, nor anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it by yourself. It is not far. It is within reach. Perhaps you have been on it since you were born and did not know." Your path is found far away from the madness of crowds. It is the road less traveled. And the road may not even exist until you create it, but it is the only road to fulfillment. Decades ago, General George Patton said, "If everyone is thinking alike, someone isn't thinking." Well, the overwhelming presence of broadcast and cable and social media may tempt us to jump on the bandwagon of thinking the same way as the crowd. And as a result, creative and original thinking often suffers. Once people complete their education, whether it's high school or college or whatever, they often become mind lazy. They just accept the prevailing thinking, whether it's true or not. You see a lot of this in politics. Thinking alike and giving in to propaganda is not creative thought. It's conditioning. It's brainwashing. Thus, everyone thinking alike isn't thinking at all. And a quote that goes very nicely with that idea is attributed to Oscar Wilde. Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Now, imitation may be the sincerest form of flattery, but we cannot and never will be somebody else, nor can we ever live their life. Are you able to be yourself? If not, what gets in the way of that? Who are you? What do you stand for? How do you show up in this world? Oh, at one time or another, we've all wished we were someone else. But wishing we were someone else causes us to lose sight of the valuable gifts and talents we already possess. There's only one unique you. No one else is quite like you. Our identity is what makes us different. It's what makes us individuals. It's what makes you, well, you. It makes no sense to exert unnecessary energy trying to be a 2.0 version of someone else when the only person we can ever perfect is ourselves. And in a world where most prefer to take the easier route, isn't it funny how we try so hard to be a double of someone else when becoming a better version of ourselves is so much easier? A basketball player wouldn't practice tennis in hopes of perfecting his jump shot. So why imitate someone we are not in hopes of creating a better us? One day at a time, we must continually be improving ourselves. But we can only do that if we focus on enhancing ourselves, not imitating others. The abilities you have are yours for a purpose. There's no one else who can do them quite like you. Your skills and talents are tailored for you, so don't be jealous of someone else's gift. Rather, embrace what's being given to you. Don't be a replica when you are an exclusive. You know, there's something special about being one of a kind. It's something we all aspire to be, and yet few of us realize that that's already who and what we are. Stay true to who you are and keep your eye on what really matters. And the good things in life that you deserve so much are bound to happen for you. Just be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Namaste.